right, so that was, that's 8, this is 9. Now we're on number 10. Ben's already up there. This is good stuff right now. Housing element.
All right, so good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. So the item before you is in regards to updating the city's general plan, updating and awarding a professional service contract to perform that work. And so a little background information. The city received an SB2 planning grant in the amount of $310,000 earlier this year for advanced planning services to aid the development of housing in California. So basically SB2, a portion of that, when that bill passed, the governor has used that to help streamline any sort of planning activities that basically help streamline the development of housing in California with the housing crisis before the COVID-19 crisis. So the city additionally, the city is required to update the city's general plan housing element. So depending on where you're at with the state, there's a requirement for an 8-year update. And so with that, they establish a regional needs housing, so a RENA number, basically on what our housing allotment should be for affordable housing. And so SACOG recently passed that for our region. And then so with that, we need to implement that with a new housing element update that's due next June 2021. So the City Council has, additionally, the City Council has identified a need to update the city's 2004 general plan to aid economic development through providing clear policies that reflect current standards and community needs. So the general plan update, the current general plan at minimum needs a technical review and update to reflect changes in state laws that have occurred since 2004. There's a need for a comprehensive update as discussed for the housing element to comply with current regional housing needs allocation requirements. And with that update to the housing, we'll also need to update the land use plan to reflect those higher density and where those residential units will go with the land use. Additionally, there's a need for the transportation circulation element of the general plan. With recent work the public works staff has done with Fear and Peers and directed by council to update our traffic model and then also reflect new state requirements for CEQA for VMT analysis. With this update, we want to bring that into the general plan and reflect those changes. And then through that, there needs to be a CEQA document and basically to reflect those changes that analyzes it and publicly notices those proposed changes. So consultant scope, we've reached out to a company named Placeworks. They provided us a scope to update the general plan to address state law changes, update the city's housing land use elements, update the zoning code to reflect those land use changes, update the transportation element as we discussed, and the CEQA document. So why Placeworks? So Placeworks, we have a little bit of history with Placeworks and also with HCD, with the housing department. Placeworks was basically contracted by the housing department to help review and implement the SB2 funding. So they're very knowledgeable and understand the scope of what the SB2 grant will pay for. And then additionally, the consultants that work for Placeworks, Jenny and Mark Teague, they were also involved with our 2013 update. And so they have, they're real familiar with the city's housing update and familiar with the funding source and the scope. And so we reached out to them with a tight timeline to get this done and implemented before next year. And so with that, there's some bullet points there. Just understand the complexity of the scope, understand the work that needs to comply with SB2 grant funding. They're available to meet the city's timeline, and they provide a proposal that is fair and reasonable in cost. Staff recommends council make that finding that it's in the best interest of the city to move forward with Placeworks in lieu of a request for proposals. Placeworks funding. And so the contract proposal is for $300,000. We expect a contingency. We put a contingency amount in there. I shouldn't say we expect it, but there's a lot of unknown with the CEQA analysis as far as depending on what type of findings or what type of responses come through based on that. And then so there's some contingency in there. And so we're looking at a contract amount with the contingency for $330,000. With expectations that we're trying to utilize the maximum amount of the SB2 funding, so we're not leaving any of that on the table, but also, we want to prioritize the use of the grant funds. and maximize that out, but also bring in that additional scope for the transportation element, leverage those grant funds and meet the needs of the city. The proposed, the funding, we're proposing to fund it through CIP account 1080. So there's an existing CIP account that's been routinely funded with a little bit of money every year. I have to build up an account for an update. And so in that account, for fiscal year 2021, we programmed the $310,000 because we knew the grant was coming in. And then there's an existing fund balance in there of approximately $650,000. So with that, the recommendation is to adopt a resolution awarding the professional service agreement to PlaceWorks for planning services related to updating the city's general plan and housing element in the amount of $300,000 with finding that's in the best interest of the city, and authorize the city manager to execute the professional service agreement on behalf of the city in substantial compliance with the material terms and conditions presented in the attached draft agreement, subject to review and approval as to legal form by the city attorney. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions right now, Ben?
No, sir.
All right, public comment?
None received.
None received. All right, so we can come back for a motion.
Through the mayor. I'd like to move that we adopt a resolution awarding a professional services agreement to PlaceWorks for planning services related to updating the city's general plan and housing element in the amount of $300,000 with the finding that it is in the best interest of the city. And also item B, authorize the city manager to execute the professional services agreement on behalf of the city in a substantial compliance with the material terms and conditions presented in the attached draft agreement, subject to review and approval as to legal form by the city attorney.
Second.
I have a first and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposed. Unanimous. Thank you very much, Ben.